So I didn't envision making a top 10 type video when starting this channel. They're not usually my cup of tea and have the potential to be produced without much insight gained after watching it or making it. I could have only seen them being fitting when milestones were hit or something, and interestingly enough, we're living through one right now. See, as of this year, Disney XD has turned 10 years old. The Mouse House entity has existed to be an offshoot of Disney Channel since conception. The latter has notably leaned towards catering mostly to female demographics in recent years, so XD was made to give the boys a place to catch programming more tailored to them, sometimes with cringy yet fascinating programs. As a result, its content tends to be more edgy or bombastic than series of the other channels. Though a lot of them had loud and eccentric personalities, some of the best can be the complete opposite. The cartoons being explored today deviate significantly from this trait, but came to be some of the bright spots on XD's programming slate. First one up is not really underrated so much as underappreciated. A couple months back, I went into depth about Milo Murphy's Law and its time in the cold vacuum of space, but to keep it brief, Milo Murphy's Law comes from a lot of the same team behind Phineas and Ferb, and as of Season 2, doesn't seem to have escaped its crazy tight clutches. It's been associated so long with the product that it proceeds to have been eclipsed by it. We're at a point where we have another Phineas and Ferb movie on the way, and no resolution to the Milo Murphy storyline. Tragic. I know it's been hard to keep up with the show due to hiatuses and stuff, but now that it's pretty much dead and buried, it bears repeating that it's worth checking out. All the episodes should be on Disney Now or video on demand, so you can watch straight from the beginning. There are a lot of surprises in store for you, if you do. Alright, on to the real list. Come on, let's go. First one up is Buttowski, a show ushered in by one of the most cursed individuals in the animation industry today. Featuring the aforementioned suburban daredevil and increasingly extreme adventures, the series is pretty much the perfect storm of well-done elements that exceedingly make this series a greatly entertaining watch. It really does reflect as a bombastic Saturday morning cartoon that just had fun doing what it does and does it very well, which is a bit of a recurring thing throughout this list, but I digress. Let's just go down the list, shall we? What makes this show so great? Animated by Mercury Filmworks and good old Flash, this series is one of the best examples of the software being used to its greatest potential. It captures the high energy and split-second timing to a T, while simultaneously knowing when to scale back and let the characters emote in a subtle manner. The music is a great compliment, which really gets you pumped for each action sequence. Speaking of which, each one of Kick's stunts is coordinated by Evel Knievel's son, which is fitting because this show takes the action up to 11 each and every time. The storyboard artists must have had a lot of fun working on these scripts, and on top of that, the voice acting is top-notch, using a roster of mostly familiar faces and voice acting to fill out Mellowbrook, along with the help of various guest stars. To this day, I'm left a little bit baffled as to how this series flew under the radar, even though there were a few factors that contributed to its quiet departure. Using the services of a premier studio, its animation was probably pretty expensive to produce. Usually Disney series that use Mercury's services either get canceled early or drop them all together to use a cheaper studio later down the line. It might have been anticipated that Buttowski would have a longer run, but its performance didn't warrant that later on. See, the series was marketed and presented to be a companion series to Phineas and Ferb, and while its theming and style ultimately fit XD much better, the latter pretty much eclipsed everything and anything on the network until Gravity Falls came around. They started airing reruns a lot more in the past few years, and I've grown to love it just as much as I did when I initially watched it. It's a top-notch series and definitely worth a look. Next up is Future Worm. If I had to summarize this series' existence, then I'd say that it's a lot better than how it looks from a distance. Like, if you got Pickle and Peanut vibes from the tone and the art style, I assure you that it doesn't particularly live up to that namesake, nor is it particularly petty to see it as such initially. For one, its rough art style, perhaps attributed to the creator's experience in more mature animated productions, does give the impression that it's invested solely in low, random, wacky hijinks meant to satisfy that 6 to 11 demographic. And it does have that, but it's also a bit more substantial. Future Worm is a buddy comedy featuring a kid named Danny and his best friend Fuge, a time-traveling, anthropomorphic, life-size earthworm with a six-pack and a full head of hair. Their adventures are primarily falling under the header of science-y stuff, as the series is predominantly of the sci-fi genre. To me, Future Worm seems like an adequate marriage of the surreal and the sensible. The relationship between our two leads helps cement me into the show and its erratic nature. Most cartoons like to espouse that they teach youngsters the value of friendship and camaraderie in the characters they create, but a lot of those relationships are made to be kind of more dysfunctional than not, mostly for the sake of comedy. Future Worm doesn't really sacrifice that, even in the midst of some of its more out there premises, and it serves as a good anchor in the midst of whatever the hell that is. For the short time Disney XD went on a marketing blitz and reran this show every day, I did enjoy my time with it. It's probably very easy for most people to turn it away. Apparently its status as a kinda chaotic sci-fi comedy automatically deems it a 2-bit Rick and Morty knockoff, because that's just how cartoon works. Rest assured, it's a wholly different beast. It's not as deep, but it's certainly satisfying enough for episodic adventures. Part of why it leaves me feeling a bit hollow is because of its relatively short, single-season run. It seems like there was potential for more complex stories or some continuity to be built upon in another season, but it wasn't given that chance. Its time on the network predates its formal premiere, but it couldn't even get a small expansion on its lifespan. Well, truth be told, I don't think the ratings were strong enough. Even for an XD original, those numbers are not optimal, to say the least. I imagine Future Worm would make for a neat limited run comic, but Disney would have to actually get around to releasing its series first. Next up is Penn Zero, one of those series with the most untapped potential. That's not to say that it didn't get enough done in the short time it was here. Within its 2 seasons, it set everything up that it could have to carry the series to a proper finale. Its premiere, if it premiered exclusively on XD, would have been one of the highest rated airings on the network up to that point. But for a modern cartoon premiere on Disney Channel, its initial numbers surpassed many expectations and stood toe-to-toe in performance with DTVA's cash cows at the time. It got so far in a short time. Penn Zero is the story of a literal part-time hero. The kid goes to other dimensions to do other heroes' jobs when they can't do it themselves, mostly thanks to the maniacal mastermind Ripon, who trapped his parents in another dimension, hoping they'd be done in while traversing the most dangerous world imaginable. Following in the footsteps of his parents, he leads the typical double life while trying to get a hold of them. This series is really compelling. Most characters have pretty engaging personalities without being obnoxious, which is in part thanks to the great voice cast. This show made me yearn for Thomas Middleditch to take on more voice work in a way I couldn't even imagine. Other than Captain Underpants, I have to say, we've been robbed. We've been robbed of some great talent, and I'm just disappointed. This series takes on a Monster of the Week approach as to how it establishes each world Penn jumps into, and it works well enough. The environments and art direction in general really suck you in as well, and by the halfway mark of Season 1, you'll be sufficiently sucked into the whole mythos of Penn Zero. I'd attribute that to Disney magic, but excellent writing chops also help. One writer and director of Zootopia came up with the concept and ran with it until Disney moved the goalposts and cut the race really, really short. I think I'm more annoyed on principle that the guy that made this hugely successful entry into the Disney canon couldn't get his serialized adventure comedy past 2 seasons, but, aside from that, Penn Zero was really worth it in the long run. The serial boom in demand for story-rich content in TV animation could have enabled Penn Zero to have a following as mammoth as Wander Over Yonder. It ticks all the boxes and satisfies the sweet spot, and it's criminal that Disney cut its lifespan short. Penn Zero is a thoughtful entry into the Disney XD library, and it really deserved a spotlight then, and it definitely deserves one now. The last show that I have to talk about here is the 7D. The 7D is like a Zen riddle. It has a way of dovetailing the most contradictory aspects of TV animation into one product. For as much fun as I had watching it in real time, it's been getting to me how much could have been done with it, and it's been eating away at me while writing this script, and a little bit before that even. The 7D is the first official adaptation of Disney's Snow White mythos within the canon of the movie. Where in a prequel series, the 7 dwarves are miners turned local heroes, serving under the local kingdom of Jollywood, keeping everybody safe from the Glooms, a pair of witches that constantly wreak havoc on the town for various reasons. The episodic feature is put together by the A-team that lovingly crafted the Spielberg-produced TV cartoons of the 90s. Casting for the series is legendary, as the 7D alone are voiced by some of the greatest modern voice actors in the country. The guest stars never fail to entertain either. It's traditionally animated by a legendary studio with a simple but fantastic style that pops along with the colors. With this winning combination, you'd think that this show would hit the ground running, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. It began airing about a month ago, 5 years ago, and ended unceremoniously 2 years later with 2 drawn-out seasons under its belt. At the time, I was totally fine with it because honestly, its ratings have never been sharp. I had fun with it, but I was also looking forward to that other show that was unceremoniously canned, so it didn't bug me too much that this one was going. Recently, a clip of the pilot's intro has made its way online, and after seeing it, slowly but surely everything came bubbling up, and I had to talk about this again. Originally, the 7D was a pilot developed for Disney Junior, perhaps in response to their other highly popular adaptations. Far later down the line, some executives asked for the series to be put on XD instead, and perhaps foolishly, the series was retooled for that audience. Keep in mind, the series is perfectly fine and enjoyable as is. However, I think the short clip of the Animax intro reflects upon a different, more fruitful reality. In an alternate universe, the 7D could perhaps stand toe-to-toe with other DTVA heavy hitters, but in this existence, we're left to sit on our hands and wonder why this show didn't stick, and I may just have the answer, and hear me out. The 7D lacked engagement. It lacked engagement because it didn't fit, and it didn't fit because it lacked a focus. It's an energetic, bombastic, loving expression of pure animated calamity, but it's not palatable to the target audience. Even without it squarely fitting into the identity of any of the 3 Disney Kids channels, it's easy to see the outside influence in its retooling. To me, I see the 7D pushing the boundaries of coked-up cartoon chaos, but also not pushing far enough. It has that schnookums and meat sensibility that leaves you wanting more, because its frenetic energy perhaps wasn't funneled into one main attribute that could have been really satisfying. Which makes me question how well Disney Junior 7D would have hit the sweet spot. In less than 10 years of existence, the Disney Junior brand has wielded a powerful hand in Western animation and brought forth some of the greatest cartoons of the decade here and to the international stage. Here lies a brand that sat down a group of 3-year-olds and was able to adequately and tactfully tell them deep, powerful, impactful stories we're more used to seeing on checkerboard-era Cartoon Network. Their original lineup is strong enough that some entries surpass the regular TV animation projects in quality. They really have raised the bar and changed the game of how preschool TV looks and works in the past 10 years. And considering that Sophia the First can gain as much, if not more clout than Star Butterfly, it's not difficult to imagine how the 7D could use such a structure to its advantage. A more measured, didactic, but exciting approach could have very well surpassed expectations and ratings. This Variety article contains a healthy smattering of journalistic jargon, but believe it or not, I understand exactly what the author is saying. I know exactly what's wrong with this show by the time I'm done with this article. But to be honest, I loved the 7D. It definitely was a refreshing series to look at in the midst of Gravity Falls mania. Based off my time in the fandom and casually following the show in real time, it's plain to see how much raw love, passion, and energy was invested into this ambitious project. I just think the show would have had a lot more critical success if it had more of a draw to it. And I really respect its status as a highly episodic, silly comedy cartoon, because truth be told, I don't think people really wanted them around this decade, with some exceptions, but I think that maybe this series could have had its cake and eaten it too, and it's tearing me up inside. For example, I think Wander Over Yonder fans could really appreciate it for sharing similar themes and tone. Loud House fans could really cop to the large and colorful main cast. Fans of Clarence and Uncle Grandpa could have enjoyed the snappy dialogue and humor, and the art direction and world building is expansive enough for even Friendship is Magic fans to sink their teeth into. But all that's lost to the wind, because people can't focus on it long enough to figure out what's going on. If you look at both intros side by side, you'll start to understand this more. The main theme, composed by Perry Grip, is wild, energetic, and throws all it can at you, but not in a targeted way. It's controlled chaos without anything holding it together. The animatics theme is light and bouncy, but it hits you with a lot of possibilities for what the show is about before the song is over. Both songs are great, by the way, but given a choice, I probably would go with the Disney Junior track. I can't be disappointed with what we got, but that old intro just scratches the right itch for me. I think the fandom really deserves props for keeping this series alive. For as relatively small as the fanbase is, they've always had a hearty spirit comparable to the most infamous fandoms, especially since Disney's own enthusiasm for this project seems to be the complete opposite. Disney now hosts many series from the Three Kids channel, some from the decade prior, but this one is not there, nor is it available on VOD. Promotional material made for the show got dumped onto an auxiliary YouTube channel, and as stated before, the second season was dragged out to oblivion. So while on one side it feels like the show is being swept under the rug, the other side shows unequivocal support. I hung out a lot within the fandom on Tumblr way back, and it was fun. It's nice to know that the few people who can appreciate the show are so dedicated. Not long after the 70s series finale hit, a friend of mine put together a petition to renew the show. Seeing the amount of signatures on it is rather bittersweet. Typically, petitions, including this one, by themselves don't have too much say in whether a show is saved or not. It's decidedly larger than I expected, though, and again, it's reassuring that this series perhaps wasn't aired in vain. Check it out. You'll probably find more compelling reasons to watch this show than the ones I could give you. I think the 7D is one of DTVA's most ambitious projects to date, and while I probably wouldn't consider it a success, it was a great experiment for its time and a great rendition of Seven Dwarf lore. The way the writers found to humanize and streamline these guys is great, and even in the context of a serialized format, it would have been even better. The same could be said for all the cartoons listed here. On the most basic level, this video probably sounds like an excuse to gripe for 20 minutes about people's viewing habits, but to be fair, a common thread concerning the cartoons involved was that people didn't give them a fair shake in the first place. Sure, Disney keeps the lights on and all that, but based on first impressions alone, I know many people were reluctant to pick up the 7D and Future Worm. That sentiment also extends to series not on this list, such as Pickle and Peanut and Billy Dilly, but it's especially tragic for these series, because the general consensus between its fans would be, yeah, there's definitely something there. Sometimes we're just not interested in stuff, and that's perfectly fine. But there's always a contingent of folks that look at a couple of promotional images and immediately become privy as to how much of an immense failure it'll be, or even just how much they don't like it, based off of a hyper-specific yet superficial trait. Everything deserves a fair shake, and even if your initial perception doesn't grip you, just remember,
everything is not what it seems.
Oh, we play to win. We win when we play. Hey. The jewels, we got them. We dig every day. Hey. We never give in. No, we never stop. No. We dig to the bottom and rise to the top. Yes, we dig to the bottom and rise to the top.